Hi, happy Monday. I'm actually recording this on Sunday, which is Mother's Day, and hopefully you are out celebrating with your mom in this beautiful weather. Oh my goodness. I'm out here in front of my Mother's Day, well, kind of my Mother's Day present. My son and my husband, maybe you can see that, built me it's kind of a trellis, kind of a thing. We're gonna grow some kiwis on it. There's my garden back there. I've been working on my garden. There we go. There's some of my other gardens. Anyway, I love gardening. I love working outside and got to do that yesterday. But today I'm talking to you. I've been looking forward to this part of Ephesians chapter 2. You did a great job. Those of you who I've corrected, you did a good job understanding the first part of Ephesians. Some really famous verses there. We are God's handiwork. What was the one right before that was that it is by grace you have been saved. It's a gift of God. It's not by works, so that nobody can boast. There's nothing that we could do to deserve or to earn salvation, to earn forgiveness. But so those are cool. This next part that we're going into Ephesians, that you'll be working in Ephesians chapter 2, starting with verse 11. This week, we're going to be starting with verse 11. And here he starts another contrast. The other was, we were dead in transgressions and sins, and now we're alive in Christ. And now this starts a different contrast. This is contrasting Jews and Gentiles, and this is where it makes sense to talk more about Old Testament, New Testament, how we view it. So the Old Testament is, remember, testament means agreement or covenant, was based on a covenant, first of all made with Abraham. Remember, way back, like 4,000 years ago now, with Abraham, where God said, Abraham, you're going to inherit it's modern day land of Israel, and he said you're going to inherit that one day. And this is the story of the Jewish nation. He was the beginning. You're going to become a great nation, and through you all the nations of the world will be blessed someday. And that was a promise made to Abraham, and it was a covenant. And then fast forward about 600 years to Moses. And Moses, remember all the stuff that happened in Egypt, and they became a great nation in Egypt, and then Moses came and led them out, all the plagues, all that stuff, and then they're out in the desert. They go to the promised land. The people are like, no, we can't take over this. We're just not strong enough, and God's not going to help us. And so they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And during that time, they learned about trusting in God. They saw him do lots of miracles, right? He parted the Red Sea. He stopped the flow of the Jordan at flood stage. I mean, they saw they had miracles every day. They ate manna every day, for goodness sake. So they were learning to be a nation. And God had made a covenant with the nation through Moses right as they came out of Egypt, before all the wandering stuff in the wilderness. There was a covenant that was made. And it was based on a treaty that was very common at that time. It was called a suzerain vassal treaty. It was common. So a suzerain, which was somebody who was kind of a conquering king, would conquer a nation that would be their vassal, and that king would be their vassal, and they would have to pledge allegiance to them and pledge to give them money, and that then the suzerain would protect the vassal. So it was an agreement, like, you do this and I'll do that. And the treaty, or the covenant that God made with Moses and the nation of Israel at that time, was kind of similar to that, only it was with God and people. And it involved sovereign oaths and signs, and it was a blood covenant, and I mean, it was like, this is a big deal. But there were also provisions. If you do this, then I will do this. If you obey the law, if you obey my commands, then I will do this. And that was the covenant that God had with those people. Ephesians chapter 2 kind of mentions circumcision. Circumcision was one of the, like I told you, it was, I'm not going to get totally into circumcision, but that was part of the blood covenant, that people, men of Israel, were circumcised to show that they were under this covenant. That was part of it. And that was part of the Old Covenant. We're happy that's part of the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. And it was important that they kept the terms of the covenant, that they did their part. And so that's where the whole law came in. And that treaty, though, had kind of a fulfillment date. And that fulfillment date was when Jesus came on the scene. In the New Testament, Jesus came on the scene and he said, I haven't come to destroy the law, but I've come to fulfill it. He came to start something new, and he initiated a new covenant with people, not just with the Jewish nation. Remember, the Old Testament is really just the story of the Jewish nation because God used them to get to Jesus, right? It was important. It's true. Old Testament was important, but it was leading up to Jesus and the new covenant. And remember, he said to Abraham, he said, and through you all the nations of the world will be blessed, not just the Jewish nation. And so here we fast forward to Jesus, and that's what he was talking about. It was through Jesus forgiving everybody for all time of sin, having the power to do that, all nations, not just the Jewish nation. So the covenant that Jesus initiated is for all nations. It's for all people from any nation. It's not restricted to the Jewish nation. And that's the point Paul is making here in Ephesians chapter 2, is that it's for anyone who would come and I want to identify with Christ and come under that covenant. It's a decision. It's a decision to come under the covenant, and so that it still opens up the way so that we can have relationship with the Father, but it's through Jesus. We would say Jesus is the mediator of the covenant, and it was his blood, not our blood. It was his blood that sealed that covenant. And it's kind of cool, all of the parallels there. So Old Testament, Old Covenant, New Testament, New Covenant, different provisions, different things in the New Covenant. The New Covenant isn't by works. It's not by what you can do, which was what the old one was. Do this, do that, do this, do that, do that, do that, so you fulfill your end of the bargain. Jesus' covenant is by grace, not what we do. There is nothing that we can do to deserve God's favor and get rid of God's wrath. It is only because of Jesus' love for us and his mercy. And that was the point of the beginning of Ephesians chapter 2, right? That's only. And then any good things that we do after that are because we love him so much in return that we want to live for him. And life in Christ is so amazing, and he produces so many good things in us, but it's different than having to obey or else. It's no, I want to obey because it's different. Okay, so let me take you through a little bit, because we're going to kind of study through this week verses 11 through the end of the chapter. Maybe we'll get there. So remember, you who are Gentiles by birth. Gentiles was everybody who wasn't a Jew, all right? You who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, and this is something that's done in the body by human hands. It's, it's not spiritual. That was actually physical. So, but there was this hostility between Jews and Gentiles. Jews did not like Gentiles, and they weren't supposed to interact with them a whole lot, because of they felt like that if you interact with them, then they're going to influence you, and so they were not supposed to do that, and that was part of the law. So there was this hostility between Jews and Gentiles that we don't understand, because we're like everybody. We're not, what do you call that when you you know what I mean? We are not prejudiced, right? There is so much prejudice, and that's not what we do anymore because of Christ, right? Because Christ is the one who said, no more of that. No more of that. We're done with that. This is for all nations. This is for all people. In Christ there is no, he said, male or female, Jew or Gentile, barbarian, Scythian. That was a distinction that they made at that time, or slave or free. There, none. All. Christ is all and is in all. But so that's kind of the background for these verses that we're going to study. He gives again this parallel. Remember, Gentiles, not Jews. At that time, you were separated from Christ. You were separated, excluded from citizenship in Israel. You weren't part of Israel, and foreigners to the covenant And the promises, that was Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses. You're foreigners to that and without hope and without God in the world. But now something different, because Jesus came and instituted this brand new covenant that's with all people, that God had been moving toward all through human history all along. Of course, there was human history outside of the Jewish history, right? But what we have recorded in the Old Testament is God working through that nation to bless the whole earth. So anyway, that's what I've been excited to share with you, and that's a background that you'll need as you read the rest of Ephesians chapter 2 this week. So thanks for watching the video. I'm going to have to think of something that will prove that you watched it. Oh, I know. So my Mother's Day gift, kind of right behind me, is it's for plants to grow on. And the type of plant that we will be planting, we've already ordered them because we heard that they grow really well here, we'll see, is kiwi. We're going to get me some kiwi. It'll take a few years, but that's what's going to grow on my little thing back here. So, all right, see you later and have a great week. I'll be back on Friday. Bye.